Hello, welcome back to my Alteryx intermediate videos. This is part 3 of my series that will try to allow you to follow along and expand your knowledge of Alteryx and some of the widgets, what they can do and how Alteryx works. As always, please subscribe to the channel so that you can be notified as I release each of these pieces, as well as any comments about what I might not have completely cleared up, and any ideas or thoughts you have about how to extend this course to cover other topics and widgets that you might be struggling with. Again, please go back and check with the introduction video because it talks about what we're doing here, a little bit more detail about the syllabus, but today we'll be on part 3, which is how to calculate a delta, and we'll be doing that by calculating a weight change over date for our puppies. But calculating deltas is something that you will probably frequently need to do, and it's much easier to do it in Alteryx than in some of the reporting tools. Data sets are out there on the Google Drive. I was a little tardy in my previous class of posting everything, but this time I posted it ahead of the video as opposed to trying to remember it when I publish the video out to my channel. So let's jump right into calculating the delta, which is a weight change by date for the puppies and their encounters. Not only will we cover some additional widgets, but this process or this problem and solution will allow me to talk a little bit more about how Alteryx handles your data flow and how the methodologies that they use for managing data flows not only gives them performance, but it also differs from the SQL language and allows you to possibly shortcut some of the steps that you need to take in order to work with your data. So very simply, John Q has seen that not only do we have puppy encounters that with their veterinarians, but we also have the weights because the veterinarians weigh them each day, and it's a good metric to analyze to see how well the vets are doing and the puppies are doing within their encounters to see if they gain or lose weight during that stay. He wants to do some reporting of that, which means that we have to generate that delta, and he wasn't sure how to do it, so I undertook building him a workflow to do it. We'll be needing the puppy encounter weights, as well as, which is a new file, as well as the puppy veterinarian encounter that we have used in the previous exercises. So the weight file we get is fed to us through one of our systems. It is a pipe delimited file, in case you've ever heard that. It is the character that is a straight line on your keyboard. It's one of the common ones that ETL developers use because it's typically not used in your data that you would get from a system. It has the encounter ID and then the weights, one for each day that they were staying there. And we need to go ahead and pull that data in and manipulate it. What we want to get out of it is that for the encounters, we want some basic encounter information, but we also really want to get the weight change from the previous day, as well as we want to know what day. Here it is, the actual day that it was weighed, so we can do some other types of analysis if we need to. So basically, if you look at this second puppy, because the first puppy in our data set was not staying at the veterinarian hospital, but in this case, the puppy was there starting on the 3rd. He was there for 4 days. He or she was there for 4 days. So on the 2nd day, here's they did not gain or lose weight. The 3rd day they gained weight, and the 4th day then they lost weight back again. I'm not again, don't criticize my data. You actually can, but this is just made up data that was generated. This, for all I know, might be kilograms, it might be pounds. If it is, it's some very large puppies, so maybe we can guess that they're kilograms or something else, but it's just putting some data out there that you can see and can be manipulated. So let's jump right into an empty workflow so we can begin to process this. As I bring up my Alteryx window, I also won't belittle the methodology that you go to bring your data in, but one of the easiest ways of bringing data is simply go into your directory folder, highlight the data that you need. In this case, we need the Encounter.Weight.dat and we need the Puppy Veterinarian Encounter spreadsheet, and we can just drag both of those in. Alteryx automatically recognizes the data types, and in this case, it doesn't recognize the data type, which actually this is the easiest way to read in a flat file in case you ever try to tell it what it is, because it brings up this nice dialog box that has an option for the delimited file as well as what you're delimiting with. We're going to use the pipe character, which is over on the right hand side of your keyboard, up a little bit, and we go from there. First row contains field names. So this to me actually is the easiest way to read in a text file because it answers all the questions for you. We'll leave the encounter data down below, and then here's this data. Let's go ahead and run this so we can see what it all looks like. Too many fields in record 2. What did we do here? I didn't actually take my delimiter in there. That's all right. We can just plug in the delimiter right here. Interesting that it did not take it. It looked like it did, but obviously it didn't. That's why you always run these workflows as you go. And there we have it. We have our weights, which is an encounter ID, and the weights as a comma separated column. And then we have our encounter data that we've been using for the previous workflows. So our first step is going to be to get these weights separated out. Now you're very familiar, I hope, if you've seen some of my other videos or you've done them yourselves, happens to be here in parse. There is a text to columns that we're going to want to use, but let's make sure we don't lose any data first, and let's put a select in here just to make sure things don't go awry. Counter ID, there's one. Because it's text, all of it came in as text. This is really an integer. And we want to make this one a lot bigger, just to make sure we hold all the data. That being said, we now come into here. One of the things you may not have noted, and I've found this very early on and sort of questions the thought process of the Alteryx team, because the split to the text to columns also can do text to rows. This is one of the few cases where I've seen a single widget do two completely different things, maybe not completely different, but really having a different result set coming out of it. So in this case, we want to split to rows, not a counter ID. We want to use weight data. The delimiter happens to be the comma that's there, and we have other options that we want to do. We want to skip empty columns just in case there's nothing there. It won't give us any data coming out in rows. Some other things that we want to choose to do. So when we run this, look at the output, and sure enough, you can see that you now have a counter ID with a record for each of the weights. You notice over here that this cell has leading spaces. This is going to get in our way, and in case you didn't already try ahead of this, and we'll show you a couple of things that we can try, but it's to fix it would be too easy. So what we want to do is turn this weight data into a fixed decimal, and if we make it a 10.4, which is what I would want to see from this, and run this, we get an error because it's not the right format, which is just really bizarre because it is a number and it can be fixed decimal, but that space at the end confuses it all. And so rather than go crazy about how to fix this, I found that if I just simply turn this into a float instead, which does the job for now, and run it, it can read it as a float. Don't quite understand how that works, but again, this is just a little tip and a little lesson learned along the way. So now what I have is my encounter and my weight. I want to know what day of the visit this weight was taken. I want to also make sure that I assure the order of this data coming into it. And so we're going to look at the long way of doing this and then take a look at a shorter way of doing this so that you can sort of understand how the Alteryx workflows process. So there is one of those little used widgets over here called Tile. Tile has the ability, when we choose rather than Smart Tile, click on Unique Value. And what we need to tell it is what is the unique column. Well, the unique column is Encounter ID. What this widget will do when we process it in just this manner is it will give a unique ID to each unique encounter ID, which we really don't need because we already have that. Also, if I had a combination of columns to make up my primary key, I can create a unique sequence number for each of those. So that's sort of what it's doing, is trying to find the uniqueness between the records and then creating a second sequence number for each of the subcolumns in there. Now that's a lot of talking about, but let's go ahead and run it and take a look at it. And you can see, looking at the output, what it did is it added a tile number, which is unique ID based on the unique or the primary key or unique columns that we gave it. And then it gave it a second one, which is sequencing them starting at 1 and moving forward. This will give us the day order going in there. While that sort of assures that, I always have been in the past, before going in and processing anything that requires things to be in order, I usually like to sort things the order that they are in. And so if we order this by ID and tile sequence number, you can see that the data indeed comes out now in this order. Let's go ahead and change the comment in here to simply say assure order. You might ask, why am I worried about order as well as just simply spelling it right? This comes from the database world. You are never guaranteed the order of your data when you're running something within a RDBMS SQL language, because it has to do with buffers and records and finding them and number of engines and parsing and things like that. So I've always gotten used to doing something like this to get my data out of it. Let's go ahead and drop a select on here so we can clean up the column names. Then we can show you what we're talking about as we go through it. So we basically here want to go ahead and the weight data. Now is a good chance to go ahead and call this the daily weight value, and we can go ahead and make it our fixed decimal. We do not need our tile number, and this tile sequence really is the day of stay value. Running that through now makes our data look a little bit cleaner and able to go through it. So this is this extra step. One is identifying a secondary unique ID, and the second step is then going through and assuring that we have the order. That is not necessary. There's another way of doing this, which lets us jump right into some of our more complex widgets, because Alteryx, as it processes data, does not change the order of your data through most all of the widgets until it has a point where it has to do some type of reordering, either through a sort widget or if you're doing a join or some other advanced accumulative process to where it is having to hold data and work through the data. But if you're just simply having a single process running through it, such as what we've done here, which is the text to columns and a select, the data order doesn't change. So even though we went to this extreme to create this extra data sets and to order things, you don't need to do that. So it's nice to be able to show that process right here, because bringing in another widget, if we want to calculate that day, or the sequence number within the encounter, we can do that with the no, we don't want multi-field. Let's delete that off of there. We want the multi-row. The multi-row presents a whole new level of sophistication that lets things process through and lets you do some more complex data cleansing and blending. But in this case, we're going to want to do it because that's the only way to create the delta, is that we want to look at one row and compare the difference to another row. And you do that through the multi-row widget. What this will do is it will make available to you for your formula more than one record. And in this case, all we want to do is get that day of stay. Obviously, the first record is day of stay 1, and we move 1 from there. So what we'll want to do is add 1 to these rows each time passing through. And this is a very easy process to get your first handle into the multi-row formula widget. So what we want to do is we want to create a new field. We're going to call that field, as you remember up here, we called it the day of stay val. So we want our new field to be day of stay val, integer 32. And what it's going to do is allow us to look back and forward into our records that we are reading. And what we need to tell it first off is what to do if we do not have a previous or a next record. So for example, when you have the first record, you don't have a previous record to do your calculation with. So what value do you want to assign to the columns in the previous record? In this case, we want to go ahead and let it be a 0 because it makes our math much easier. We also can select a number of records or rows to look at one point in time. So if we choose one record to look at, you can see down here that we will see the current record, the row that already passed through, and the row that is not yet passed through. That gives us a set of 3 records to look at: the previous record, the current record, and the next record. So we can do our calculations looking backwards and looking forwards in our data set. If we choose 2 rows to hold in our buffer, now we actually have 5 records in that buffer. We have the current record, we can look at the 2 previous records and the next 2 records that haven't come through the stream yet. So think of this as having multiple rows of data that you can access. Let's go back to 1 because this is being a very simple calculation. All that we want to do is add 1 to the previous record's day. Since the first record coming through this has a previous value of 0, it becomes a very easy calculation. All that we want to do is take a look at the previous day of stay value. That is the record that has already gone through our widget. And we want to add 1 to it. We also have the ability to call up functions, saved expressions, and things like that. A lot of times when I'm working with a complex formula, I will go ahead and test that formula out in just a regular formula widget and then save that and then bring it into here and edit it for the new attribute names or new field names and go on from there. It's a safe way of doing it. So if we go ahead and run this, you see that what we get out of this, good to see we actually haven't fixed that weight data yet. We dropped this in the wrong place. That's all right. But looking here, we can see that for encounter 1, we did one thing wrong. You notice it just numbered them because we forgot in this widget, which is really cool because we can fix 2 things at once. We really forgot we wanted it over here. So this makes it a little bit cleaner. But if you notice, we forgot to group that data. So it also has the ability to do a group by through that multi-row formula, which means it starts over again in its processing of records and stops its processing of records when your primary key or your unique key or your group by field is there. So we want to number these within the encounter. So all we have to do is click on the encounter ID. And then rather than being numbered sequentially in order, we now get them ordered within our data primary key, which is the encounter ID. So you can see that encounter ID 1 has a day of stay 1, and then encounter ID 2 has 1, 2, 3, and 4. If you compare it to what we got out here, you can see that we have the same information. So essentially this one widget, more complex widget, which is the multi-row formula, allowed us to do what the tile did, possibly in a much more direct manner, your choice as to which one you would want to use, and we don't need to assure the order of the records because they are cleaned up coming through here as well. As I look through this and realize that I'm taking multiple steps, we want to go ahead and rename this column up here just to make our life easier, because now this column has a common name going through it. You notice when we come back here, a few more things we look at is Alteryx is keeping track of what we're doing and says, whoa, wait a minute, you changed something here. We sure did, because this is no longer a field. We want to get rid of it in this select, so we can click here and say forget all missing fields, just keeping it up to speed. So now running this through, you see that on the top flow, which is the one that we're not primarily going to use, we have our encounter IDs, our day of stays, and our weight vowels. And down here we have the same fields, but in a slightly different order because they haven't been reordered. And you cannot reorder them because the multi-row formula simply tacks them one to the end, the same way that the formula widget does as well. So one reason you might use the tile as opposed to the multi-row formula is because you don't want to think about how that formula works or that widget works and how to generate formulas that work and give you the result that you need. But to do a delta, you have to learn it anyway, so I sort of like the idea of doing this first. Give myself a comment so I remember what it's doing going forward. So either way, at this point in time, to calculate that delta, we have to use the multi-row formula. Now, multi-row formulas only have one formula at a time, so if I have to do more than one things to my set of data, I have to now attach in multiple formulas. So let's go ahead and pick up another one, drop it in. What we're going to do here is to go ahead and calculate the delta. Parsing error because it's trying to look ahead and see what's going on. That's okay. So again, we want to create a new field, and let's go ahead and choose a good name for that new field, and we're going to call this the weight change val. As a fixed decimal, that we want to go ahead and just set it to the 10.4. One of the things you will notice about this is that it has less friendly dialogue interfaces, and that's why this is considered to me to be an intermediate, because you sort of have to know a little bit about what's going on in order to complete the configuration. So for example, rather than in most of the widgets, if we set it to fixed decimal, it gives us 2 fields. This one just gives us 1. We need to type in what we want to have. Number of rows, again, we only need to look at the previous record, and we don't have to just single previous record, not multiple records, and 0 works out for our math pretty well. We want to go ahead and make sure we group by the encounter ID this time going in, and now we have our variables that we want to use in this calculation. Delta is very easy. We take the current weight, which is the current daily weight value, and we subtract the previous weight, or the weight in the record that just went through, which is row minus 1. Drop it in there, and that will give us our difference. Verify that by running it, make sure we haven't typed in things wrong. And here we can see that this is the initial weight. They didn't gain or lose anything second day, and you can verify the data changes along the way. Things look good. In case you're just thinking that's too easy, would the other calculations be more difficult? The answer is we can copy this and paste it up here, because that's what we're going to verify that these data sets are the same. While we're here as well, let's go ahead and drop a browse on the end of it. And you can see that we have the same data set up here. Oop, dropped off that encounter ID. Cutting and pasting is usually very easy. I noticed this last time I had done this as well. I just sort of forgot about it. That's why you always check your data coming out. Things that look quite right in that data set, now we can know why. It's because it dropped off our group by, which is a strange things to drop off, but it's always good to check that configuration. Much better answer this time. As you can see, it went through and properly calculated it to match what's going on in this one as well. Check our records counts are the same. So we're happy. Things were put through in the proper way. We can do a calculate delta on either of these workflows. So again, if you only want to use one and it makes you feel good to have the data in a prescribed order, which is when I first built this and I was fairly new to Alteryx, I was a little concerned about the data flow, but then I realized that Alteryx does a really good job of protecting the integrity of your data flow, especially so that you can use something like the multi-row formulas and not have to worry about the way the data looks. However, if the data that's coming in isn't in the proper order to do your multi-row formula, then you will want to go ahead and sort it to make sure that it is in the proper order. We didn't really, like I said, need to do this because our data came in and was parsed out into the proper order, and that order was maintained by Alteryx. So now basically we've taken two paths and solved John Q's problem, and we could just leave it at this, but I wanted to create him a little bit more friendly data set for him to use in his reporting, because he is still a novice at all of this, and rather than make his life a little bit more difficult, I figured I'd give him a good reporting set. That's why I have this encounter table already dragged in over here. But the first thing I want to do is to help clean up this data set. To begin with, we do not need that first day. And we'll talk a little bit about the true and false size of your formula. So this is the day of stay. If it equals 1, we will separate the first day out. The nice thing about the Alteryx filter is that you do not lose the data that does not match. It simply puts it into a different stream. So now I have two streams of data. One is just the day 1, and one of which is the day 2 and above, which is the data that John Q really needs for his reporting. And I've done this in this order because I want to get a little fancy with the result set and make it even nicer for John Q, because he really keeps me busy. And since I'll be giving it to John Q, I always go back and fix my annotations. So the true side is first day, and the not true side is everything else. We want to go ahead and work on this data that's coming in to join it together. So let's go ahead and put a select on here to make sure we can clean it up. You'll see this is coming in from a spreadsheet, so some of the things are bad. Not bad, they don't match what we want them to be. These IDs are integer 32s, just by my default of going on there. The puppy name, we can leave that as a V string. The clinic name, leave that. The encounter timestamp, we really don't need a timestamp for his reporting, so it's really easy at this point in time just to turn it into a date, which makes it nice for the reporting and much easier to do than in a reporting tool. We have our encounter code, our location code, and the length of stay, which again, not really a double. Let's set that to integer 32 as well. So we've cleaned up the data fields coming into this. What we want to do is get all that control information, or all of that dimensional information, added to this metric. So we very easily do that with our join. Again, it does not hurt to do all the cleanup that you feel like you need to do just to make your reporting easier. Reporting tables do not violate any of the modeling standards. Something I want to show you about the filter, about the join widget. If you notice, it has all of the fields listed here that you will need. And so we want to go ahead and, well, we can either clean this up after the join, or you can also clean it up within the join. I sort of vacillate between the two of them. And again, let's take a look at what we need and don't need from here. We do not need the right. Let's click on here again. We don't add things together. There we go. Let's join those by encounter ID. Changes the way things look down here. We do want the encounter ID, but we want the puppy information at the top of this. If we highlight many of these, let's give this guy a better name. This is encounter date. Somewhere along the way, this became a capital. We do not need our second encounter ID, so we can go ahead and turn that off. Let's go back to these guys again. We were trying to highlight these down the way. Holding the control key, as I'm not doing right now, I can highlight many of these. So we're going to take all of these attributes. All right, control is plus, control, and we can move this up. Interesting, we are not having too much luck doing this. I usually do this much better. I'm not really doing a good control right now. All right, let's get all these highlighted again. Bad driving day. Fixing to get very frustrated with this because the mouse and I are not getting along with each other today. There we go. Now we can just right click on this and move it up. So we have encounter ID, the puppy wid. Let's go ahead and give this the better name, matching our warehouse. Want to be consistent with John if nothing else. Puppy wid, puppy name, etc. We have the length of stay, the daily weight value. We have the weight change value, and then we have the day of stay, which I want to actually move up below the length of stay. So this gives us a good order. It makes it look easier for John Q to find his data and his metrics. We can run this. Always check the left side, make sure we didn't lose any data, which we did. And then here's the joins. We have the encounter, the puppy information, the clinic name, the encounter date, the encounter code, location, length of stay, day of stay value. It's just a nice order. Again, this is just a nice thing to do. Order really doesn't matter for these fields. I just think it'll make it easier for John when he gets through it. Now you might be wondering what I've left still to go, and that happens to be up here. But first, I sort of remember back in my head, John Q needed one more thing. He needed to know the date of the weight measurement. And the date of the weight measurement comes from the encounter date plus the day of stay. So that's a very simple formula. Again, John Q could calculate this in his reporting tool, but let's do it for him. Let's find my formula, drop my formula in here. It's a pretty simple formula. I want to add a column. Hello, add column. And we want to give it a name of weight. Measurement. Date. Reminds me it wants it to be a date field. And one of my favorite formulas, in case you haven't noticed that already, is the date time add. Make this bigger so that you can see it. What we want to do is we want to add to the encounter date. We want to add the day of stay value -1. It's counting days, and choose days for our increment type. And you can see then it has now popped up the data preview, so things are looking good. So now at the very end of this, we actually have the weight measurement date, fix our annotation. So what we would like to do next is to bring this original weight in there, just in case that's a useful piece of information, and that happens to be on the day 1 record. Cleaning this up, we can now bring this piece of data stream into our primary flow. Join these on encounter date, encounter ID, and encounter width. Since we renamed it in our previous join, we got to make sure we work to correct that without the automatic. We can just go ahead and choose the 2 columns. If they were the same name, it would have found them automatically. We do not need any of the left pieces, except for the daily weight. Change these back. There's also a nice place to change this daily weight value from our float to our fixed decimal. We also now want to go ahead and change, this one is actually our arrival weight. And also let's change this to a fixed decimal. And we want to move this down a little bit, very top of this. We'll leave it after weight length of stay. Give that a run. We have left some things on the left side of this join because these were the single day encounters, which do not have any changes. And this is going to forward. We see the arrival weight, as well as our other fields. Well, we forgot to move our weight measurement date up. We can do that right here. Running this one last time puts it mostly in the order I think John would be comfortable with. Daily weight, the arrival weight. Drop a browse on this. We also, if we like, we can drop and just run this one last time, look at our data. Gives an idea of what's going on. Sort of the data profiling that it does. Things are looking clean. We can look across the top of this and see that we have everything looking okay as far as its constituency and its null and not null values. So it is a good data set. I would simply drop a output data onto the bottom of it. Drag this join to my output data. And from there, I can go ahead and save this as whatever John Q would like to see. Drop it into my results file. Call it results. Since I really don't want to overwrite the one I generated originally that's sitting out there on the shared drive, we'll call this results 2. I'm going to create a new sheet. Now let's just make sure that everything's clean. Let's overwrite the file, which will delete the current one and create it a new one if we need to. We run that. We can go to the log by clicking the white space. Click on the file name. It goes ahead and opens it up for us. A little bit of Excel editing lets us see that our data set is there. John Q can go ahead and use this as he desires in a report. We can send it to him so he can see it. We can send it to you so you can see it. And then we can also go ahead and send John Q the workflow. So this is the workflow was put together. Again, the top part of this was only a stub to show you two different methodologies depending upon your comfort level. This one is much shorter and it lets you understand Alteryx maintains your data order. Next one I'll be putting together has to do with actually reporting these through Alteryx's little reporting utility, showing you some of the tricks to use that as you might need to. It's a nice, easy to use, simple reporting facility so that you can look at the data to make sure the reporting is good. It will not replace any of your major dashboards and other reporting facilities that you currently use. Go ahead and subscribe to this channel so you can see when I release the next video in this series. Add some comments if you have any additional thoughts, questions, things I didn't cover very clearly, or something you would like to see included in this course or other videos. I will always look forward to your suggestions and thoughts. Outside of that, thanks for watching. Have a great day.